there's a moment that changes everything. It happens in the spaces between words, in the pause between thoughts, in the absence of noise. Silence is something most people avoid, filling every gap with distractions, music, conversations, scrolling endlessly on their phones. But what if silence wasn't empty? What if it held answers we've been too busy to hear? We live in a world addicted to stimulation. Every second is an opportunity to consume something new, to engage, to react. The idea of sitting in silence, with no external input, is terrifying for many. It feels unproductive, even unnatural. But the truth is, silence is where the real work happens. It's where clarity is born. It's where we meet ourselves without the layers of noise that usually shield us from deeper truths. Think about the last time you sat in complete silence. Not just the absence of sound, but true silence, where even your mind started to settle. How long did it last before you reached for something, checked a notification, or felt the need to fill the void? That discomfort you felt, that's the reason silence is so powerful. It forces us to confront things we'd rather avoid. There's a story about a Zen master who was asked to explain enlightenment. Instead of responding with words, he simply sat in silence. Minutes passed. His students grew restless. Some looked at each other, confused. Finally, one of them broke the silence and asked again, "Master, what is enlightenment?" The teacher sighed and said, "The moment you stop demanding an answer is the moment you'll understand." We assume that wisdom comes from gathering more knowledge, more experiences, more input. But often, the deepest insights come from from stripping away the excess. In silence, we hear what's actually there, beneath the layers of mental noise we mistake for truth. Consider this. When was the last time you made a big decision? Maybe it was about your career, a relationship, or a major life change. Chances are, you spent hours thinking about it, weighing pros and cons, asking for advice. But what about the moment when the answer became clear? It wasn't in the noise of overanalyzing. It was in the stillness, the moment when you finally stopped thinking and simply knew. That's the power of silence. It doesn't force understanding, it allows it. We've been conditioned to believe that silence equals absence. But in many traditions, silence is not a lack of something, it's the presence of something deeper. In Buddhism, silence is a form of wisdom. The mind, like water, becomes clear only when it's still. The more we stir it, the murkier it gets. The same is true in life. When we fill every moment with noise, we become disconnected from ourselves. We mistake distraction for progress. But when we embrace silence, even for a few moments a day, we start to notice things we never did before. The subtle emotions we ignored, the instincts we brushed aside, the inner voice that had been drowned out by external opinions. Silence isn't just about removing sound, it's about making space. Space to reflect, space to listen, not to the world, but to yourself. And in that space, we find something we weren't expecting. Answers we've been searching for all along. Silence is often misunderstood. We see it as something passive, something that happens when there's nothing else going on. But true silence is active. It's a discipline, a practice. It's the ability to remain still in a world that constantly demands movement. And when we embrace it, we start to see that silence is not empty. It's full of everything we've been too distracted to notice. Think about a moment when someone sat with you in silence, perhaps during a difficult time. They didn't need to say anything. Their presence alone spoke louder than words. That's because silence holds weight. It carries meaning. It allows emotions to settle, truth to rise, and understanding to deepen. Ancient traditions have long understood the power of silence. The Tao Te Ching says, "Silence is a source of great strength." In Buddhist monasteries, Silence is not just encouraged, it is essential. Monks practice noble silence, refraining from speech, not as an act of suppression, but as a way to cultivate awareness. When the mind is quiet, we begin to notice the subtleties of existence. The way the wind moves through the trees, the rhythm of our own breath, the emotions we usually push aside. There's a reason why so many profound realizations come during meditation or in the stillness of nature. It's because silence allows us to hear what's real. Our minds are constantly filled with thoughts, worries, and expectations. But beneath all that noise, there is something deeper: intuition, clarity, a knowing that doesn't need words. Many of us fear silence because it exposes what we've been avoiding. The moment we turn off distractions, our unresolved emotions rise to the surface: regrets, insecurities, questions we don't want to face. And yet this is precisely why silence is so powerful. It doesn't let us hide. It forces us to sit with ourselves as we truly are. There's an old Japanese concept called ma, the idea that emptiness is not just a void, but a meaningful space. In traditional Japanese architecture, art, and even music, ma is the space between things that gives them meaning. The pause in a conversation, the blank space in a painting, the silence between musical notes. Without ma, everything is crowded, overwhelming, chaotic. But when we honor the space, we find balance. The same applies to our lives. If we don't make room for silence, our thoughts become cluttered, our emotions tangled. We lose perspective. But when we intentionally create space, whether through quiet mornings, silent walks, or moments of meditation, we give ourselves the gift of clarity. Imagine starting your day not with notifications and noise, but with silence. Just a few moments to breathe, to center yourself before the world rushes in. No external input, just stillness. How different would your day feel? Silence isn't about doing nothing. It's about doing the most important thing: reconnecting with yourself. And when you embrace it, you start to realize that the answers you've been searching for were never outside of you. They were always there, waiting in the quiet. Once we start to embrace silence, something shifts. We begin to hear ourselves more clearly. Our intuition strengthens, our awareness deepens, and we start to recognize patterns in our own thoughts and behaviors that we were too distracted to notice before. But beyond personal clarity, silence teaches us something even more profound. It changes the way we relate to the world. Have you ever noticed how uncomfortable most people are with silence in a conversation? The moment there's a pause, someone rushes to fill it. It's as if we believe silence means something is wrong. But in truth, silence is where real understanding happens. When we stop speaking just to respond and start listening to truly understand, our relationships transform. Think of a time when someone gave you their full attention, when they didn't interrupt, didn't rush to give advice, but simply held space for you. How did that feel? Powerful, right? That's the gift of silence. It allows presence. It allows others to feel seen and heard. There's a story from Zen tradition about a young student who went to a master seeking wisdom. The student spoke endlessly, asking questions, sharing opinions, filling the air with words. The master simply poured tea into the student's cup. Even when the cup overflowed, he kept pouring. Alarmed, the student finally shouted, "Stop! The cup is full!" The master smiled and said, "Like this cup, you are full of your own thoughts and opinions. How can I teach you if you do not first empty your mind?" This is what silence does. It empties our mental cup so that something new can enter. In a world that constantly tells us to speak, to produce, to prove ourselves, choosing silence can be an act of rebellion. It's a way of reclaiming our own attention. Instead of reacting impulsively, we learn to observe. Instead of drowning in information, we create space for insight. This is especially true in conflict. When emotions run high, our instinct is to defend, to argue, to make our point heard. But silence can be a more powerful response than words. It allows us to step back, to cool down, to see the situation for what it really is. Many misunderstandings would dissolve if we simply paused before reacting. Silence is also deeply restorative. It's no coincidence that monks and sages retreat into nature, away from the noise of daily life. Silence heals. It resets the nervous system, lowers stress, and brings the body into a state of balance. In today's fast-paced world, we rarely allow ourselves true silence. Even when we're alone, we fill the space with music, podcasts, or scrolling through our phones. But what if we let ourselves just be? What if we gave our minds a moment to breathe? There's a reason why some of the most brilliant minds in history valued solitude. Albert Einstein took long, silent walks to think. Nikola Tesla would sit in silence for hours before making a breakthrough. Silence isn't just a void. It's a catalyst for creativity, insight, and peace. By making silence a practice, we begin to notice a change. We feel calmer, less reactive. Our thoughts become clearer. We listen better, speak with more intention, and move through life with a sense of ease. It's not about avoiding sound or isolating ourselves. It's about learning to be comfortable in the quiet, knowing that in silence, the deepest truths reveal themselves. If you found value in this message, take a moment to pause before leaving, just a few seconds of silence. Then, if this video resonated with you, let me know by liking, subscribing, and sharing it with someone who might need this reminder today. Until next time, embrace the silence.